divided into three groups in compact formation. All on foot, archers were positioned on the flanks, protected by the stakes which they planted into the ground. The Duke of York commanded the right, Lord Camoys the left, whilst the king placed himself in the center. Fearing a French flanking attack through the woods of Agincourt, Henry sent 200 archers to that location in order to protect his right wing. Some considered the terrain unsuitable for a charge and dismounted, sending away their horses. Behind the first line was a second formation, also of dismounted men-at-arms, led by the Counts of Aumale, Damartin, and Fauconberg. And behind them, a third formation, made up of archers, crossbowmen, and soldiers of the lower nobility. The missile men were despised by the higher nobility and knights in the front lines, and were not able to use their weapons to good effect. The clash seemed inevitable once negotiations failed. The two armies viewed each other from afar, sized each other up. Nervous tension was high on both sides, and the wait was nerve-wracking. At 10 o'clock, or perhaps it was nearer 11, the English soldiers knelt on the ground, made a sign of the cross, and put soil in their mouth, symbolizing their mortality. All of the English army uttered a loud cry, as much to boost their own courage as to scare the French. Rather than advancing, initially, the French did not move. The English archers let fly a first volley of arrows. For the French, this was a provocation too far. The cavalry threw themselves into the assault. There was a rush of adrenaline. The aim of the cavalry was to charge against the English archers arrayed behind their stakes and to break through their ranks, finding weak points in the English defense which would allow the French men-at-arms, the flower of chivalry, to overwhelm the English. The cavalry charge was met by a constant barrage of arrows from the English archers. Seeing this disaster, at the command of Albret and Boucicaut, the men-at-arms of the first line began to move forward to help the cavalry. They waded through the mud, advancing with great difficulty, being harried by the survivors of the cavalry charge, whose wounded horses had become uncontrollable and had started to retreat towards the French lines. Men were blocked, they collided into each other, they fell and could not get up. They were trampled underfoot amidst the English arrows which fell in a steady stream and forced the French to advance with their visors down, unable to see where they were going, with no choice other than to keep moving forward as fast as they could. At first, the French pushed the English line back and even gained some success against the English right, commanded by the Duke of York. The Duke was killed, along with a good number of his men. But, harassed by the arrow volleys of the English, the French suffered a funneling effect. Trapped between the woods of Agincourt and Agincourt, they were pressed too close to each other, even to the point of not being able to lift their weapon arm to strike a blow. Isolated from the rest of the army, the first French line broke. Men fell over the bodies of their companions. Some tried to retreat. Others surrendered, yet more died. Such was the fate of the Constable Charles d'Albret, who was killed in the attack. In its turn, the second line of the French army threw itself into the attack to bring support to the vanguard. But the muddy ground, littered with the bodies of men and horses, and men of the first line trying to pull back, slowed its progress. Armed with daggers, swords, axes, hammers, the English archers left their defensive position and threw themselves into the melee. The Duke of Alençon and his men succeeded in reaching the English line, approaching the banner of Henry V. The king found himself up against Alençon. For a brief moment, the outcome of the battle was in the balance, as was the fate of Henry V himself. But the king's bodyguard came to his aid, striking down the Duke of Alençon. Many French nobles, finding themselves in complete difficulty, surrendered. Amongst them were Boucicaut and the Duke of Orléans, who were taken prisoner. Some were pulled out of the heaps of dead and wounded and captured and taken behind the English line. Two events which initially seemed insignificant had decisive consequences. Two young local nobles, Isambard d'Agincourt and Robinet de Bournonville, crossed through the woodland of Agincourt with a group of peasants. They were part of a maneuver aimed at attacking the English baggage. They pillaged the baggage train, taking away several valuable royal objects, including a sword and a crown. At the same time, the Duke of Brabant, younger brother of John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, arrived at the battlefield. He threw himself into the attack at the head of a small troop of men. This attack gave rise to a rumor that strong French reinforcements were about to arrive and prompted Henry to take a radical decision. Men of the middle and lower nobility were killed in cold blood with an axe or other weapon behind English lines. Only the princes and others of high rank were spared this killing. Other French prisoners were gathered together in a barn to which the English set fire. Terrified, many French soldiers fled the field in panic. At the end of the day, the French army had been defeated. The English were exhausted. Henry V did not even think of pursuing his enemy. He wanted to resume his march to Calais. Afterwards, he embarked for London with more than 300 prisoners. In but a few hours, 1,000 or so French had died, the majority from the ranks of the nobility and chivalric elite. 7 princes of the blood had either perished or been captured. As for the English, they merely lost 2 noblemen, along with a couple of hundred